The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow across the rows of neatly stacked produce and canned goods. The grocery store was alive with its usual hum, shopping carts rattling over tile floors, the distant beep of scanners at checkout lanes, and snippets of conversation drifting between aisles. It was an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind where people shuffled in after work to grab dinner ingredients or pick up last-minute essentials. No one noticed the man lingering by the dairy section, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his dark jacket. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just standing there, staring at the yogurt containers as if trying to decide between strawberry and vanilla, but something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing toward the front entrance, his movements too deliberate, too controlled. Or maybe it was how no one seemed to recognize him, even though this was a small town where most faces were familiar. At first the tension was subtle, almost imperceptible. A mother pushing a cart filled with cereal boxes shot him a quick look before turning away. An elderly man browsing the cheese aisle hesitated for a moment, then moved on without making eye contact. These tiny interactions, or lack thereof, added up, creating an undercurrent of unease that rippled through the store. But life went on. Shoppers continued their routines, oblivious to the storm quietly gathering in their midst. The man finally pushed away from the dairy case, his footsteps soft but purposeful as he navigated the aisles. He didn't take anything from the shelves, instead he seemed to be mapping out the space, memorizing exits, counting heads. His presence became a shadow, unnoticed yet impossible to ignore once you sensed it. It wasn't until later, when the screams began, that anyone realized what had been building all along. Earlier that day, the parking lot outside the store had been unremarkable, cars pulling in and out with mechanical efficiency. People juggled bags of groceries while balancing phone calls, their lives intersecting briefly before diverging again. Among them was Claire, a young woman with auburn hair tied back in a messy bun. She'd stopped by during her lunch break to pick up ingredients for lasagna, her go-to comfort food after stressful days at the office. Her cart rattled slightly as she wheeled it toward her car, her mind already drifting to thoughts of wine and Netflix. What she didn't notice, what none of them noticed, was the black sedan parked 2 spots down, its windows tinted just enough to obscure the driver inside. Inside the car, the man who would later haunt the aisles of the grocery store sat perfectly still, his fingers drumming lightly against the steering wheel. He wasn't impatient, exactly, more like calculating. Every movement around him registered with precision. The teenage boy tossing a football near the cart returned, the elderly couple arguing good-naturedly about which brand of coffee to buy, the security guard patrolling the perimeter with bored indifference. To anyone watching, he might have appeared harmless, even mundane. But there was a coldness in his gaze, a detachment that suggested he saw these people not as individuals but as pieces on a chessboard, waiting to be moved according to his design. Back inside the store, the atmosphere shifted subtly as the afternoon wore on. Employees restocked shelves and chatted idly during lulls in customer traffic. In the deli section, a young cashier named Marcus joked with a regular customer about the weather, laughing easily despite the long hours ahead. Across the store, a mother struggled to keep her toddler entertained while filling her cart with snacks and juice boxes. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and cleaning products, a comforting blend that masked the growing tension beneath the surface. And then there was the man in the dark jacket, now perched casually by the frozen food section, pretending to examine a box of waffles. His calm demeanor belied the chaos brewing within him, a storm that would soon erupt with devastating force. As dusk fell, the store grew busier, families arriving en masse to stock up for the weekend. The energy shifted, becoming louder and more chaotic. Children darted between aisles, giggling as they played hide-and-seek among the towering displays. Parents called after them, their voices tinged with exasperation but also warmth. Amidst the commotion, the man blended seamlessly into the crowd, his presence swallowed by the noise and activity. He lingered near the bakery, watching as a harried employee tried to manage a line of customers eager for freshly baked cookies. When the fire alarm suddenly blared, startling everyone, he didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped back, letting others rush toward the exits while he remained rooted to the spot, his expression unreadable. The false alarm turned out to be nothing, a malfunctioning sensor, according to the manager, but it served as a dry run for what was to come. As shoppers returned to their carts, grumbling about the inconvenience, the man slipped away, disappearing into the labyrinth of aisles. He moved with practiced ease, avoiding cameras and staying clear of employees. By the time the store settled back into its rhythm, he had positioned himself near the pharmacy, close enough to observe the main entrance but far enough to avoid suspicion. The pieces were falling into place, each step bringing him closer to his goal, and yet, no one suspected a thing. Claire returned to the store that evening, drawn back by the realization she'd forgotten garlic. She parked in the same spot as earlier, unaware of the black sedan now absent from the lot. Inside, the lighting felt harsher somehow, the cheerful chatter replaced by a quieter, more subdued energy. As she wandered toward the produce section, she caught sight of the man in the dark jacket again. This time, their eyes met briefly, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something unnerving about his stare, a depthless quality that made her want to look away. She did, hurrying past him and focusing on finding the garlic bulbs. But the encounter stayed with her, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts as she paid for her purchase and headed toward the exit. Outside, the parking lot was eerily quiet, the earlier bustle replaced by an unsettling stillness. Claire fumbled with her keys, her breath visible in the cool night air. As she unlocked her car, she glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking nearby. The sensation of being watched prickled at her skin, but when she turned, the lot was empty save for a few scattered vehicles. Shaking off the feeling, she climbed into her car and drove home, dismissing the incident as paranoia brought on by stress. Little did she know, the man in the dark jacket had been watching her leave, his lips curling into a faint smile as he noted the make and model of her vehicle. Back inside the store, the final act was unfolding. The man had positioned himself strategically near the customer service desk, where a frazzled employee was dealing with a returns issue. His timing was impeccable, calculated down to the second. When the power flickered momentarily, plunging the store into brief darkness, panic rippled through the crowd. Shoppers froze, unsure whether to stay put or head for the exits. That's when the man made his move, pulling a knife from his pocket and shouting something unintelligible. The sound cut through the confusion like a blade, freezing everyone in place. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. What happened next unfolded with horrifying speed. The man lunged forward, grabbing a woman who had been reaching for her purse. Her scream shattered the silence, triggering a chain reaction of terror. People bolted in every direction, some dropping their carts and abandoning their belongings in their haste to escape. Children cried, their voices drowned out by the cacophony of shouts and footsteps. Employees scrambled to lock doors and call for help, their training forgotten in the face of sheer panic. Through it all, the man moved with chilling precision, his actions deliberate and unhurried. He wasn't interested in theft or random violence. He had a specific target in mind, and nothing, not the chaos, not the pleas of his victims, would deter him. Amidst the pandemonium, Claire's face flashed in his mind. He remembered her auburn hair, the way she'd looked at him earlier with wary curiosity. She wasn't here now, but that didn't matter. She had seen him, and that alone made her significant. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of authorities, the man slipped away, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. The store was left in disarray, its aisles littered with abandoned carts and spilled groceries. Shaken survivors huddled together outside, recounting fragments of the nightmare they had just endured. And somewhere in the distance, the black sedan idled patiently, its driver ready to disappear into the night. In the days that followed, the grocery store became a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape and swarmed by investigators. Forensic teams combed through every inch of the building, dusting for fingerprints and collecting evidence. Security footage revealed glimpses of the man in the dark jacket, his movements captured in grainy detail as he stalked the aisles before unleashing chaos. Yet despite the wealth of data, identifying him proved maddeningly elusive. He wore gloves, avoided direct camera angles, and left behind no trace of DNA. Even witnesses struggled to provide consistent descriptions, their memories clouded by fear and adrenaline. Some recalled his height or build, others mentioned the peculiar stillness in his demeanor, but none could agree on specifics. It was as if he had been designed to evade detection, a ghost slipping through the cracks of reality. The investigation expanded outward, probing connections between the victims and potential motives. Detectives interviewed employees, regular customers, and even Claire, whose fleeting encounter with the man had taken on new significance. She recounted the moment their eyes met, the chill that ran down her spine, and her instinctive decision to leave the store early. Though shaken, she insisted she had never seen him before that day. Investigators pressed her for details. Did he say anything? Did he seem agitated? But her answers only deepened the mystery. "He didn't do anything," she said finally, her voice trembling. "That's what scared me." Meanwhile, the community reeled from the attack. Social media buzzed with theories and speculation, some grounded in fact, others spiraling into conspiracy. Local news outlets aired interviews with survivors, their faces blurred to protect their identities. One woman described hiding behind a freezer display, clutching her child as the man passed mere feet away. Another recounted how she had tripped and fallen, expecting the worst, only to be ignored entirely. Each story added layers to the portrait of a predator who defied logic, targeting victims seemingly at random, while leaving others untouched. The randomness itself became its own form of terror, a reminder that anyone could have been next. As the weeks dragged on, frustration mounted within the task force assigned to the case. Leads dried up, tips dwindled, and public interest waned. The man in the dark jacket remained a phantom, his motives as opaque as his identity. Then, just when hope seemed lost, a breakthrough emerged from an unlikely source, a receipt found crumpled near the pharmacy counter. At first glance, it appeared insignificant, just another piece of debris swept up in the aftermath. But upon closer inspection, detectives noticed something unusual, a handwritten note scrawled on the back in faint pencil marks. The message read simply, "Tomorrow, same time." The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Was it a taunt, a clue, or perhaps a misdirection meant to throw them off track? Whatever the intent, it forced law enforcement to reconsider everything they thought they knew. Surveillance footage from neighboring businesses was reviewed frame by frame, searching for anyone matching the suspect's description. Patterns began to emerge, subtle behaviors repeated across multiple locations. A man loitering outside a gas station, another lingering in the corner of a fast food restaurant. Each sighting occurred at roughly the same hour, late afternoon fading into evening, reinforcing the cryptic note's implication of routine. The pattern suggested premeditation, a level of planning that chilled even seasoned investigators. Public alerts were issued, urging residents to remain vigilant and report suspicious activity. Flyers bearing sketches of the suspect circulated widely, plastered on bulletin boards and shared online. Yet despite the heightened awareness, the man eluded capture. If anything, he seemed emboldened, his presence hinted at in whispers and fleeting glimpses. A cashier at a convenience store swore she recognized him from the composite image, describing how he purchased a bottle of water and left without speaking. A jogger claimed to have seen someone matching his description lingering near a playground, though by the time police arrived, the area was deserted. Each report added urgency to the hunt, but also underscored the futility of chasing shadows. Then came the twist that no one saw coming. During a routine sweep of surveillance footage from the original grocery store attack, analysts spotted something overlooked in earlier reviews. In the moments leading up to the chaos, the man in the dark jacket could be seen exchanging words with an employee, a young man wearing a name tag that read Marcus. At first it seemed innocuous. Employees often interacted with customers throughout their shifts. But further scrutiny revealed something odd about the interaction. Marcus appeared unusually animated, gesturing emphatically as if explaining something. The man listened intently, nodding occasionally, before walking away. Seconds later, the power flickered and the attack began. Detectives immediately brought Marcus in for questioning. Initially cooperative, he denied any involvement, insisting the conversation had been about nothing more than the weather. But inconsistencies in his story quickly surfaced. Why had he failed to mention the exchange during initial interviews? Why did security footage show him glancing repeatedly at his watch in the minutes before the attack? Under mounting pressure, Marcus cracked, confessing to a role he hadn't fully understood until it was too late. The man in the dark jacket had approached him days earlier, posing as a market researcher conducting surveys. Charismatic and persuasive, he had convinced Marcus to share information about the store's layout, staff schedules, and security measures. In return, Marcus received what he believed to be harmless compensation, a gift card, and a promise of anonymity. Only now did he realize the true nature of the bargain he had struck. The revelation sent investigators scrambling to reevaluate the scope of the threat. If Marcus had unwittingly aided the attacker, who else might have been manipulated in similar ways? Grocery stores, malls, and other high-traffic venues suddenly seemed vulnerable, their everyday operations transformed into potential vulnerabilities. Authorities worked tirelessly to identify additional accomplices, real or imagined, while grappling with the unsettling possibility that the man in the dark jacket operated, not alone, but as part of a larger network. His methods, exploiting trust, exploiting routine, were chillingly effective, turning ordinary citizens into unwitting pawns in a game they couldn't comprehend. And yet, for all the progress made, the central question remained unanswered. Who was he? What drove him to orchestrate such calculated acts of terror? The answer, when it came, would shatter assumptions and expose truths darker than anyone dared imagine. The breakthrough arrived not from forensic analysis or witness testimony, but from a source buried deep within bureaucratic archives. A clerk combing through decades-old records stumbled upon a file marked inactive, its contents dusty and forgotten. Inside was a photograph that stopped her cold. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the composite sketch of the man in the dark jacket. Attached to the photo was a name, Daniel Hargrove. Further digging revealed a history both tragic and disturbing. Hargrove had been institutionalized in his 20s following a series of violent episodes linked to untreated mental illness. Diagnosed with severe paranoid schizophrenia, he had spent years cycling in and out of psychiatric facilities, his condition exacerbated by substance abuse and social isolation. Eventually he vanished from the system altogether, presumed homeless or deceased. But Hargrove's disappearance wasn't the end of the story, it was merely the beginning of a transformation. Investigators pieced together fragments of his life post-institutionalization, uncovering a pattern of meticulous reinvention. Using aliases and falsified documents, he embedded himself in various communities, blending into the background while observing those around him with predatory precision. Interviews with former acquaintances painted a picture of a man who exuded charm when necessary, but maintained an impenetrable emotional distance. One woman described him as a ghost, someone who could slip in and out of conversations without leaving a trace. Another recalled how he once offered to help organize a neighborhood watch program, only to abandon the effort midway without explanation. These anecdotes, scattered and incomplete, hinted at a mind capable of extraordinary manipulation. What truly set Hargrove apart, however, was his fixation on control. Records showed he had meticulously studied human behavior, devouring books on psychology, sociology, and even urban planning. He viewed society as a machine, its gears turning predictably until disrupted by chaos. To him, orchestrating attacks in public spaces wasn't about destruction for its own sake. It was about exposing vulnerabilities, forcing people to confront the fragility of their routines. Grocery stores, parking lots, fast food restaurants, all were chosen not randomly, but because they represented microcosms of order ripe for dismantling.
His ultimate goal, according to notes recovered from a storage unit rented under one of his aliases, was to create a living experiment, where fear became the dominant currency. The discovery of Hargrove's manifesto sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Written in dense, fragmented prose, it detailed his philosophy with chilling clarity. People cling to patterns, he wrote, because patterns give them meaning. Break the pattern, and you break them. The document outlined not just the grocery store attack, but a series of planned incidents, each escalating in complexity and scale. Maps, diagrams, and annotated photographs accompanied the text, revealing a level of preparation that bordered on obsession. Most alarming was a section titled Phase 2, which hinted at targeting larger venues, a stadium, a mall, perhaps even a transit hub. The implications were staggering, suggesting that the grocery store had been merely a trial run for something far more devastating. As authorities scrambled to locate Hargrove, the public response grew increasingly volatile. News outlets dissected every detail of his profile, amplifying fears with sensational headlines. Parents kept children indoors, businesses implemented stricter security measures, and social media erupted with calls for vigilante justice. Yet amidst the hysteria, a quieter narrative emerged, one of empathy and accountability. Mental health advocates argued that Hargrove's descent into violence stemmed from systemic failures, pointing to gaps in care and support for individuals like him. They urged caution, warning against reducing his actions to simple villainy. "This isn't just about one man," one advocate stated during a televised panel. "It's about a society that abandons its most vulnerable members, then acts surprised when they lash out." Despite these efforts, the prevailing mood remained one of dread. Rumors spread of sightings across the region, prompting panicked reports that overwhelmed emergency lines. Law enforcement doubled patrols in high-risk areas, deploying canine units and drones in a desperate bid to intercept Hargrove before he struck again. Meanwhile, Marcus, the unwitting accomplice, became a lightning rod for public outrage. Harassed online and ostracized by neighbors, he retreated into seclusion, haunted by guilt and fear. In interviews conducted under heavy protection, he expressed remorse but also bewilderment. "I thought I was helping someone," he said, his voice breaking. "How was I supposed to know?" Then, just as hope began to falter, a tip came in from an unexpected source, a librarian. She reported seeing a man matching Hargrove's description frequenting her branch, poring over maps and architectural blueprints. Surveillance footage confirmed his presence, capturing him exiting the building with a backpack slung over one shoulder. Police converged on the area, setting up roadblocks and canvassing nearby neighborhoods. Hours later, they found him holed up in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by stacks of research materials and crude sketches of potential targets. When officers breached the premises, Hargrove offered no resistance, surrendering silently, as if resigned to his fate. His arrest brought a measure of relief, but the scars ran deeper than anyone anticipated. Survivors of the grocery store attack struggled to reclaim their sense of safety, some refusing to enter similar spaces, even months later. Communities grappled with questions of resilience and responsibility, debating how best to prevent future tragedies. And as Hargrove awaited trial, locked away in solitary confinement, the nation watched closely, torn between demands for justice and uneasy reflections on the forces that shape monsters and the systems that fail to stop them.
The parking garage was a labyrinth of concrete and shadows, its levels stacked like layers of a cake no one wanted to eat. It loomed over the city's downtown district, an unremarkable structure that served as a backdrop for thousands of lives every day. People drove in, parked their cars, and went about their business, shopping, working, meeting friends, without giving the place much thought. The hum of engines echoed off the walls, mingling with the occasional squeak of sneakers on polished floors or the distant clatter of shopping carts being wheeled toward elevators. It was functional, utilitarian, and utterly forgettable. But beneath its bland exterior, something sinister was taking shape. On the third level, near the far corner where the lights dimmed slightly, a man leaned against a pillar, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He wore a plain hoodie and jeans, blending seamlessly into the crowd of commuters and shoppers. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and he didn't carry anything obvious, a bag, a weapon, nothing that might draw attention. Yet there was something unsettling about him, though most people couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Maybe it was the way he seemed to hover just outside the flow of traffic, observing without participating. Or maybe it was the faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth, as if he knew something everyone else didn't. For weeks he had been coming here, always at the same time, late afternoon, when the garage was busiest. At first glance, he appeared to be waiting for someone, perhaps a friend or coworker. But no one ever joined him. Instead, he would stand there for hours, watching the comings and goings with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Employees who worked in nearby offices noticed him eventually, exchanging wary glances as they passed by. "Who is that guy?" one asked during a coffee break. No one had an answer. Security cameras captured his face, but the footage revealed little beyond his presence. He wasn't doing anything illegal, not yet anyway. Still, his persistence gnawed at them, planting seeds of unease that grew with each passing day. Across town, Sarah Jenkins was finishing up another long shift at her office job. She hated staying late, especially when the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets took on that eerie glow unique to urban twilight. The building she worked in was modern and sleek, all glass and steel, but the parking garage attached to it felt like a relic from another era. Its low ceilings and narrow aisles made her feel boxed in, claustrophobic even. Tonight she hurried through the echoing space, keys jingling in her hand as she approached her car. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, the sound ricocheting off the walls. She glanced around instinctively, scanning for movement, though she told herself she was being paranoid. Nothing bad ever happened here, or so she thought. As she unlocked her car door, she caught sight of the man in the hoodie out of the corner of her eye. He was leaning against a pillar again, arms crossed, staring directly at her. Their eyes met briefly, and she froze, her heart skipping a beat. There was something predatory in his gaze, a flicker of amusement that sent a jolt of fear coursing through her veins. She fumbled with her keys, dropping them once before managing to open the door. Sliding into the driver's seat, she locked the doors immediately and started the engine, her hands trembling on the wheel. When she pulled away, she glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting him to follow her. He didn't move, just stood there, watching her leave. Sarah tried to shake off the encounter, telling herself it was nothing. Maybe he was lost, or maybe he recognized her from somewhere. Whatever the reason, she resolved to park closer to the elevators next time, somewhere brighter, more visible. Over the next few days, she replayed the moment in her mind, dissecting every detail. The way he'd looked at her, it wasn't curiosity or casual interest. It was deliberate, calculated. And then there was the smirk, the faint curve of his lips that suggested he enjoyed her discomfort. It haunted her, lingering in the back of her thoughts like a shadow she couldn't shake. Meanwhile, the man continued his routine, appearing daily in the parking garage like clockwork. He never spoke to anyone, never interacted beyond the occasional nod or sidelong glance. Yet his presence became impossible to ignore. One evening, a young couple returning from dinner found him blocking their path to their car. They hesitated, unsure whether to confront him or find another route. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice smooth and calm. The couple exchanged nervous looks but stepped aside, letting him pass. As he walked away, they noticed he hadn't actually been heading toward any specific vehicle. He simply wandered off, disappearing into the maze of parked cars. Stories like this began to circulate among regular visitors to the garage. A woman reported seeing him crouched beside a sedan, peering inside as if searching for something. Another claimed he had followed her to her car, stopping only when she shouted for help. Each account added layers to the growing sense of dread, painting him as a figure of menace despite the lack of concrete evidence. Security guards patrolled more frequently, their radios crackling with updates as they kept an eye on him. But he remained elusive, slipping through cracks in their surveillance like smoke. Then came the incident that changed everything. Late one Friday night, a college student named Emily Parker arrived at the garage after attending a study group. She was tired, her backpack heavy with textbooks, and eager to get home. As she walked toward her car, she heard footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate. She turned, expecting to see another pedestrian hurrying to their vehicle. Instead, she saw the man in the hoodie, his face partially obscured by the dim lighting. Panic surged through her, and she broke into a run, her shoes slapping against the cold floor. He gave chase, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. Emily reached her car and yanked open the door, scrambling inside just as he grabbed the handle. She screamed, slamming the lock button and pressing herself against the passenger seat. Through the window, she could see his face pressed close, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he stood there, unmoving, as if savoring her terror. Then, without warning, he stepped back and melted into the darkness, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Shaking uncontrollably, Emily called 911, her voice breaking as she described what had happened. Police arrived within minutes, scouring the area with flashlights and K9 units. But the man was gone, leaving behind only tire marks and whispers of fear. The attack on Emily Parker galvanized the community, turning the parking garage into a focal point of anxiety and suspicion. Local news outlets covered the story extensively, broadcasting grainy security footage of the man in the hoodie prowling the aisles. Tips poured in from concerned citizens, some credible, others wild guesses fueled by paranoia. Detectives pored over the evidence, piecing together fragments of information in hopes of identifying their suspect. Witnesses described him as average-looking, neither tall nor short, neither muscular nor frail. His features were forgettable, almost deliberately so, making him harder to track down. Even those who had encountered him struggled to recall specifics, their memories clouded by stress and adrenaline. One lead stood out amidst the chaos, a partial license plate number spotted near the scene of Emily's attempted abduction. Officers traced it to a rental agency, where records showed the car had been leased under a fake name. Surveillance footage from the agency revealed a man matching the description, complete with hoodie and nondescript attire. He had paid in cash, providing minimal identification. Investigators dug deeper, uncovering a trail of aliases and falsified documents stretching back years. Whoever this man was, he had gone to great lengths to erase his identity, crafting a persona designed to evade detection. As the investigation unfolded, patterns emerged. Similar incidents had occurred in other cities, each involving a lone male figure targeting women in isolated areas. In Chicago, a jogger reported being stalked through an underground lot. In Denver, a mother recounted how a stranger had tried to snatch her child from a stroller parked beside her SUV. The details varied, but the methodology remained consistent: careful observation, calculated timing, and a chilling disregard for human life. Authorities began to suspect they were dealing with a serial predator, someone who thrived on fear and control. The realization sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Task forces were assembled, resources pooled, and databases cross-referenced in search of connections. Meanwhile, public awareness campaigns urged residents to remain vigilant, particularly in high-risk locations like parking garages and transit hubs. Flyers bearing composite sketches circulated widely, plastered on lampposts and shared online. Yet despite the heightened scrutiny, the man in the hoodie remained elusive, his movements unpredictable and his motives unclear. Back in the city where it all began, Sarah Jenkins couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Since her encounter with the man, she had avoided the parking garage altogether, opting instead for street parking or rideshare services. But avoidance brought its own form of torment, a constant reminder of the danger lurking just out of sight. One evening, as she left work, she decided to take a different route home, hoping to shake the unease that clung to her like a second skin. As she waited at a red light, she glanced in her rearview mirror and froze. There he was, standing on the sidewalk, his hoodie pulled low over his face. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt a surge of panic. This time, however, she didn't hesitate. Slamming her foot on the gas, she sped through the intersection, ignoring the honking horns and angry shouts behind her. When she finally reached her apartment, she bolted the door and collapsed onto the couch, her chest heaving. Her phone buzzed incessantly, with missed calls and texts, but she ignored them, too shaken to respond. Hours later, as she lay awake in bed, she realized something terrifying. He had known where she lived. How else could he have shown up at that exact moment, in that exact place? The thought paralyzed her, filling her mind with questions she couldn't answer. Was she his next target? Had he been following her all along, biding his time until the perfect opportunity presented itself? Her fears proved justified when, days later, police discovered a cache of items hidden in a storage unit rented under one of the suspect's aliases. Among the contents were maps of the city, marked with locations corresponding to recent attacks. There were also photographs, dozens of them, taken surreptitiously, capturing victims unaware. Sarah's face stared back at her from several images, her expressions ranging from distracted to frightened. Investigators determined that she had been singled out early on, likely due to her predictable schedule and proximity to the parking garage. The revelation left her devastated, her sense of safety shattered beyond repair. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, thanks to a janitor working late-night shifts at a nearby office building. While emptying trash bins in the lobby, he noticed a man lingering near the elevators, seemingly indecisive about which floor to visit. Something about him struck the janitor as odd. His posture, his demeanor, the way he kept glancing at the security cameras mounted above the doors. When the man finally stepped onto an elevator, the janitor noted the direction it traveled and alerted building management. By the time authorities arrived, the man had vanished, leaving behind only a discarded cigarette butt. DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to the suspect, narrowing the search considerably. Detectives zeroed in on the surrounding area, canvassing businesses and reviewing additional surveillance footage. They soon identified a hotel frequented by the man, where staff recalled a guest matching his description checking in under yet another alias. A raid on the room yielded a treasure trove of evidence, journals filled with cryptic notes, sketches of potential targets, and detailed plans for future attacks. Most chillingly, investigators found a collection of personal belongings stolen from previous victims, jewelry, wallets, even a child's stuffed animal. Each item bore witness to the lives disrupted by his actions, tangible reminders of the trauma he inflicted. Armed with this new information, police launched a coordinated effort to apprehend him. Roadblocks were set up, patrol units doubled, and drones deployed to monitor key locations. Public alerts urged citizens to report any suspicious activity, emphasizing the importance of swift action. The pressure mounted, squeezing the man into increasingly desperate maneuvers. He abandoned his usual haunts, venturing further afield in search of anonymity. But his methods betrayed him. The same meticulous planning that had kept him hidden now painted a clear picture of his intentions. Finally, after weeks of relentless pursuit, officers cornered him in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building was dark, its windows boarded up, and its interior cluttered with debris. Inside, they found him hunched over a table, surrounded by maps and blueprints. He offered no resistance, surrendering silently as if resigned to his fate. Handcuffed and led away, he maintained an eerie calm, his expression unreadable. Later, during interrogation, he spoke in clipped sentences, refusing to elaborate on his motives or acknowledge the harm he had caused. To him, it seemed, the world was merely a stage, and he its reluctant director. In the aftermath, the city grappled with the fallout. Survivors sought counseling, struggling to rebuild lives fractured by fear. Communities rallied together, organizing self-defense workshops and advocating for improved safety measures. The parking garage underwent renovations, its dim corners replaced with brighter lighting and additional cameras. Yet for all the progress made, the scars ran deep, reminders of a darkness that had seeped into the fabric of everyday life. And as the man awaited trial, locked away in solitary confinement, the nation watched closely, torn between demands for justice and uneasy reflections on the forces that shape monsters, and the systems that fail to stop them. The stadium buzzed with anticipation, a living organism pulsing with energy as fans streamed through its gates. It was Friday night, and the high school football game had drawn a record crowd. Parents juggled blankets and thermoses of coffee, teenagers laughed and shouted from the bleachers, and vendors hawked popcorn and hot dogs beneath the floodlights. The air smelled faintly of grass and sweat, mingling with the crisp bite of autumn. On the field, players stretched and jogged in pre-game warm-ups, their jerseys glowing under the bright lights. Everything seemed normal, ordinary even, but somewhere in the stands, an unease began to creep in. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A woman sitting near the top row of the bleachers shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting toward the shadows cast by the towering light poles. She couldn't quite place it, but something felt off about the man sitting 2 rows below her. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his attention seemingly fixed on the field. But there was a stillness about him that didn't match the chaotic energy around him. His posture was too deliberate, too controlled. Most people would have dismissed it as nothing more than introversion or disinterest, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching, not the game, but the people. By halftime, whispers had begun to ripple through the crowd. A group of kids reported seeing someone lingering near the concession stand, staring at them for far too long before walking away without buying anything. Another parent mentioned spotting the same figure earlier, pacing along the perimeter of the parking lot. None of these observations were enough to cause alarm on their own, but together they created a low hum of discomfort, like static electricity crackling just beneath the surface. Security guards exchanged glances, their radios crackling softly as they discussed whether to investigate further. For now, though, nothing warranted action. The game continued, the scoreboard ticking upward as cheers erupted sporadically, and then came the moment that changed everything. During the third quarter, with the home team trailing by a touchdown, a commotion broke out near the south end zone. At first it was hard to tell what had happened, a scuffle maybe, or someone tripping over a stray bag. But within seconds, panic spread like wildfire. People stood up abruptly, craning their necks to see what was going on. Then came the screams. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie, had grabbed a young boy who had been playing tag with friends near the fence separating the field from the stands. Witnesses later described how quickly it happened. 1 second the boy was laughing, chasing after his buddy. The next he was yanked backward, disappearing into the shadowy gap between the bleachers. Parents surged forward, shouting and pointing, while others scrambled to shield their own children. Some ran toward the scene, desperate to intervene, while others bolted for the exits, clutching their kids tightly. The stadium transformed into chaos, the once orderly rhythm of the evening shattered. Players stopped mid-play, confused and alarmed, as coaches frantically ushered them off the field. Overhead, the announcer's voice crackled through the speakers, urging everyone to remain calm, but his words were drowned out by the rising tide of hysteria. Security personnel rushed to the area where the boy had vanished, flashlights cutting through the darkness beneath the bleachers. They found signs of a struggle, scuffed sneakers, a dropped water bottle, but no trace of either the child or his abductor. By the time police arrived, sirens wailing in the distance, the crowd had thinned considerably, many families fleeing in terror despite pleas to stay put. Those who remained huddled together, shaken and whispering among themselves. What had started as a festive community event had devolved into a nightmare. In the days that followed, the investigation consumed the town. Detectives combed through every inch of the stadium, searching for clues, fingerprints, footprints, discarded items. Surveillance footage revealed glimpses of the suspect, his face partially obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt. He moved with purpose, navigating the crowded spaces with ease, blending into the background until the moment he struck. Investigators noted how he avoided direct camera angles, keeping his head down and his movements fluid. It was clear this wasn't a random act of violence, it was calculated, rehearsed. Witness statements painted a fragmented picture of the man. One teenager recalled seeing him earlier in the evening, standing alone near the ticket booth. He looked weird, she said during an interview. Like he was waiting for something, but not really paying attention to anyone. Another witness, a vendor selling snacks, remembered serving him a soda. He didn't say much, the vendor explained, just nodded when I asked if he wanted anything else. These details, pieced together, suggested someone familiar with the layout of the stadium, someone who had planned his actions meticulously. As the search intensified, authorities released sketches of the suspect, urging the public to come forward with any information. Flyers plastered across town bore the headline "Missing Child" in bold letters above a photo of the abducted boy, Ethan Carter. 10 years old, with sandy blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile, Ethan was beloved by everyone who knew him. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the community, leaving parents fearful and children wary. Vigils were held outside the stadium, candles flickering in the cool night air as neighbors prayed for his safe return. But as hours turned into days, hope began to wane. Tips poured in, some credible, others wild guesses fueled by fear and speculation. Police chased leads tirelessly, following each thread to its logical conclusion only to find dead ends. The man in the hoodie remained a ghost, slipping through cracks in their surveillance like smoke. And yet, amid the frustration and despair, investigators uncovered something unexpected: evidence suggesting this wasn't the first time he had targeted a victim. Buried deep in local archives, detectives discovered reports of similar incidents dating back several years. In each case, a lone male figure had been spotted lurking near schools, parks, and other places frequented by children. Some accounts described attempted abductions thwarted by quick-thinking bystanders. Others mentioned strange men asking invasive questions or offering rides to unsuspecting kids. The descriptions varied slightly, but certain patterns emerged: a preference for isolated areas, a knack for blending into crowds, and an unsettling ability to vanish without a trace. One particularly chilling report involved a middle school girl named Lily Monroe, who claimed a stranger had followed her home from soccer practice 2 summers prior. According to Lily, the man had approached her in the parking lot, pretending to ask for directions. When she ignored him and kept walking, he trailed her silently, maintaining a safe distance until she reached her front door. Her mother called the police immediately, but officers found no sign of the man. At the time, the incident was treated as an isolated event, dismissed as paranoia or coincidence. Now, however, it took on new significance. Detectives revisited old cases, connecting dots that had previously gone unnoticed. They interviewed victims and witnesses, piecing together fragments of a larger puzzle. Slowly a profile emerged, a predator operating not randomly, but strategically, targeting vulnerable individuals in environments designed to foster trust and familiarity. Schools, sports fields, playgrounds, all were chosen because they represented safe spaces, sanctuaries where danger seemed unthinkable. By violating those boundaries, the man amplified the psychological impact of his crimes, turning ordinary settings into sources of dread. The realization sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Task forces were assembled, resources pooled, and databases cross-referenced in search of connections. Meanwhile, public awareness campaigns urged residents to remain vigilant, particularly in high-risk locations like stadiums, malls, and transit hubs. Flyers bearing composite sketches circulated widely, plastered on lampposts and shared online. Yet despite the heightened scrutiny, the man in the hoodie remained elusive, his movements unpredictable, and his motives unclear. Back in the town where Ethan Carter had disappeared, life ground to a halt. Parents kept their children indoors, canceling playdates and extracurricular activities. Schools beefed up security measures, posting additional staff at entrances and monitoring hallways more closely. Even routine errands became fraught with tension, as shoppers scanned parking lots and sidewalks for suspicious activity. Fear permeated every aspect of daily existence, transforming once familiar landscapes into minefields of uncertainty. For Ethan's family, the anguish was unbearable. His parents, Mark and Lisa Carter, appeared regularly on local news outlets, pleading for their son's safe return. Their faces were gaunt, their voices trembling as they described the moments leading up to his abduction. "He was so excited about the game," Lisa said during one emotional interview. "We never imagined, we thought we were safe." Volunteers organized search parties, combing nearby woods and abandoned buildings in hopes of finding clues. Psychics offered unsolicited advice, claiming visions of Ethan alive but scared. Each day brought fresh waves of hope and despair, as tips led nowhere and time ticked inexorably onward. Then, just when it seemed all hope was lost, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a retired teacher named Margaret Hayes. While sorting through old boxes in her attic, she stumbled upon a photograph taken at a community fair several years earlier. In the background, partially obscured by a crowd, stood a man who bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the suspect. Margaret recognized him instantly, not because she knew him personally, but because he had attended multiple events in town over the years, always alone, always watching. She contacted authorities immediately, providing not only the photo, but also detailed recollections of his behavior. The discovery sent investigators scrambling to re-evaluate their approach. Enhanced imaging technology revealed subtle features in the photograph that matched descriptions provided by witnesses. Facial recognition software flagged potential matches in criminal databases, narrowing the list of suspects considerably. Meanwhile, Margaret's tip prompted others to come forward with similar stories, describing encounters with the same man at various locations throughout the region. One woman recalled seeing him loitering outside a daycare center, jotting notes in a small notebook. Another mentioned how he had once tried to strike up a conversation with her son during a Little League game, only to retreat when she intervened. With renewed momentum, police launched a coordinated effort to track him down. Roadblocks were set up, patrol units doubled, and drones deployed to monitor key areas. Public alerts urged citizens to report any suspicious activity, emphasizing the importance of swift action. The pressure mounted, squeezing the man into increasingly desperate maneuvers. He abandoned his usual haunts, venturing further afield in search of anonymity. But his methods betrayed him. The same meticulous planning that had kept him hidden now painted a clear picture of his intentions. Finally, after weeks of relentless pursuit, officers cornered him in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building was dark, its windows boarded up and its interior cluttered with debris. Inside, they found him hunched over a table, surrounded by maps and blueprints. He offered no resistance, surrendering silently as if resigned to his fate. Handcuffed and led away, he maintained an eerie calm, his expression unreadable. Later, during interrogation, he spoke in clipped sentences, refusing to elaborate on his motives or acknowledge the harm he had caused. To him it seemed, the world was merely a stage, and he its reluctant director. Ethan was found alive but traumatized, hidden in a makeshift shelter constructed deep within the warehouse. Rescuers described the scene as haunting, blankets strewn across the floor, empty food wrappers scattered around and crude drawings pinned to the walls depicting scenes of captivity. Despite the ordeal, Ethan clung to hope, whispering repeatedly, "I knew you'd find me." His reunion with his family was bittersweet, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. In the aftermath, the town grappled with the fallout. Survivors sought counseling, struggling to rebuild lives fractured by fear. Communities rallied together, organizing self-defense workshops and advocating for improved safety measures. The stadium underwent renovations, its dim corners replaced with brighter lighting and additional cameras. Yet for all the progress made, the scars ran deep, reminders of a darkness that had seeped into the fabric of everyday life. And as the man awaited trial, locked away in solitary confinement, the nation watched closely, torn between demands for justice and uneasy reflections on the forces that shape monsters and the systems that fail to stop them.
The fast food restaurant sat at the corner of a busy intersection, its neon sign flickering faintly in the twilight. It was one of those places that seemed to exist everywhere, brightly lit, perpetually crowded and humming with the low murmur of conversations punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or the sizzle of burgers on the grill. Families gathered around sticky tables, teenagers lounged in booths scrolling through their phones, and harried delivery drivers shuffled in and out, clutching bags of food. The air smelled of grease and salt, mingling with the crisp autumn breeze that swept through the open doors. To most people passing by, it was just another chain restaurant, indistinguishable from dozens of others scattered across the city. But beneath its unremarkable exterior, something sinister simmered. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A young woman named Claire had been sitting near the window, sipping her milkshake while waiting for her fries to cool. She noticed him first, a man seated alone at a table near the back, hunched over a tray of untouched food. He wasn't doing anything unusual. He simply stared ahead, his expression blank, his hands clasped tightly together. Yet there was something unsettling about him, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way he didn't touch his food, or how his eyes darted toward the door every time someone entered. Or maybe it was the stillness of him, as if he were holding his breath, waiting for something. Claire dismissed the thought, chalking it up to paranoia. After all, this was a public place, bustling with activity. What could possibly happen here? She turned her attention back to her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through social media. Across the room, a group of kids laughed loudly, their voices echoing off the tiled floor. An employee called out an order number, and a man approached the counter to collect his meal. Everything seemed normal, or so it appeared. But then came the first ripple. A mother pushing a stroller paused near the entrance, glancing warily at the man in the corner. Her child whimpered softly, and she adjusted the blanket draped over the stroller, before moving toward a booth closer to the front. Another customer, a college student typing furiously on his laptop, glanced up briefly, his brow furrowing as he caught sight of the man. He hesitated for a moment, then resumed typing, shaking his head slightly as if dismissing his own unease. These small reactions went unnoticed by most, but they added up, creating an undercurrent of tension that rippled through the restaurant. By the time evening rolled around, the crowd had thinned somewhat, leaving behind a quieter but no less chaotic atmosphere. Employees bustled behind the counter, restocking napkin dispensers and wiping down surfaces. A few stragglers lingered at tables, finishing their meals or chatting idly. And still, the man remained in his seat, unmoving, his presence growing more pronounced with each passing minute. No one spoke to him, and he didn't attempt to engage with anyone else. Instead, he watched, his gaze flitting between customers, employees, and the exits. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. For a brief moment, the entire restaurant plunged into darkness, save for the glow of cell phones and the distant hum of traffic outside. People froze, startled, some letting out nervous laughs as they waited for the power to return. When the lights snapped back on, everything seemed fine, at least at first glance. But when the manager stepped out from the kitchen to reassure everyone, she noticed something odd. The man in the corner was gone. At first, no one thought much of it. Perhaps he'd decided to leave during the blackout, slipping out unnoticed in the confusion. But then a teenage girl screamed, pointing toward the restroom hallway. Customers turned to see what she was looking at, and that's when panic erupted. A young boy, no older than 6 or 7, stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. Behind him, partially obscured by the shadows, was the man in the hoodie, his hand gripping the boy's arm tightly. The reaction was instantaneous. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them close. Employees rushed forward, shouting for the man to let go of the boy. Someone called 911, their voice trembling as they described the scene unfolding before them. The man didn't respond to the commotion. Instead, he dragged the boy further into the hallway, disappearing into the dimly lit corridor that led to the restrooms and storage areas. Chaos broke loose as customers scrambled for the exits, abandoning their belongings in their haste to escape. Children cried, their voices drowned out by the cacophony of shouts and footsteps. Employees barricaded themselves behind the counter, calling for help while trying to keep track of who was still inside. Police arrived within minutes, sirens wailing as squad cars screeched to a halt outside. Officers flooded the building, flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for the man and his hostage. They found signs of a struggle in the hallway, scuffed sneakers, a dropped toy car, but no trace of either the boy or his captor. By the time they reached the rear exit, it was too late. The man had vanished. taking the child with him. In the days that followed, the investigation consumed the town. Detectives combed through every inch of the restaurant, searching for clues, fingerprints on the soda machine, fibers snagged on the edge of a table, surveillance footage capturing fragments of the man's movements. He had avoided direct camera angles, keeping his face hidden beneath the hood of his sweatshirt, but his actions betrayed a chilling level of preparation. Investigators noted how he had timed his move perfectly, using the blackout as cover to seize the boy without drawing immediate attention. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was calculated, rehearsed. Witness statements painted a fragmented picture of the man. One employee recalled seeing him earlier in the evening, ordering a cheeseburger and fries but never touching them. He just sat there, she said, during an interview, didn't talk to anyone, didn't even look at his phone. Another witness, a father dining with his family, remembered noticing the man's peculiar behavior. He kept checking the exits, like he was planning something, the man explained. I thought maybe he was meeting someone, but, I don't know, something about him felt wrong. As the search intensified, authorities released sketches of the suspect, urging the public to come forward with any information. Flyers plastered across town bore the headline "Missing Child" in bold letters above a photo of the abducted boy Ethan Miller. 8 years old, with curly brown hair and freckles dotting his cheeks, Ethan was beloved by everyone who knew him. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the community, leaving parents fearful and children wary. Vigils were held outside the restaurant, candles flickering in the cool night air, as neighbors prayed for his safe return. But as hours turned into days, hope began to wane. Tips poured in, some credible, others wild guesses fueled by fear and speculation. Police chased leads tirelessly, following each thread to its logical conclusion, only to find dead ends. The man in the hoodie remained a ghost, slipping through cracks in their surveillance like smoke. And yet, amid the frustration and despair, investigators uncovered something unexpected. Evidence suggesting this wasn't the first time he had targeted a victim. Buried deep in local archives, detectives discovered reports of similar incidents dating back several years. In each case, a lone male figure had been spotted lurking near schools, parks and other places frequented by children. Some accounts described attempted abductions thwarted by quick-thinking bystanders. Others mentioned strange men asking invasive questions or offering rides to unsuspecting kids. The descriptions varied slightly, but certain patterns emerged: a preference for isolated areas, a knack for blending into crowds, and an unsettling ability to vanish without a trace. One particularly chilling report involved a middle school girl named Lily Monroe, who claimed a stranger had followed her home from soccer practice 2 summers prior. According to Lily, the man had approached her in the parking lot pretending to ask for directions. When she ignored him and kept walking, he trailed her silently, maintaining a safe distance until she reached her front door. Her mother called the police immediately, but officers found no sign of the man. At the time, the incident was treated as an isolated event, dismissed as paranoia or coincidence. Now, however, it took on new significance. Detectives revisited old cases, connecting dots that had previously gone unnoticed. They interviewed victims and witnesses, piecing together fragments of a larger puzzle. Slowly a profile emerged, a predator operating not randomly, but strategically, targeting vulnerable individuals in environments designed to foster trust and familiarity. Schools, sports fields, playgrounds, all were chosen because they represented safe spaces, sanctuaries where danger seemed unthinkable. By violating those boundaries, the man amplified the psychological impact of his crimes, turning ordinary settings into sources of dread. The realization sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Task forces were assembled, resources pooled, and databases cross-referenced in search of connections. Meanwhile, public awareness campaigns urged residents to remain vigilant, particularly in high-risk locations like stadiums, malls, and transit hubs. Flyers bearing composite sketches circulated widely, plastered on lampposts, and shared online. Yet despite the heightened scrutiny,
The man in the hoodie remained elusive, his movements unpredictable, and his motives unclear. Back in the town where Ethan Miller had disappeared, life ground to a halt. Parents kept their children indoors, canceling playdates and extracurricular activities. Schools beefed up security measures, posting additional staff at entrances and monitoring hallways more closely. Even routine errands became fraught with tension, as shoppers scanned parking lots and sidewalks for suspicious activity. Fear permeated every aspect of daily existence, transforming once familiar landscapes into minefields of uncertainty. For Ethan's family, the anguish was unbearable. His parents, Mark and Lisa Miller, appeared regularly on local news outlets, pleading for their son's safe return. Their faces were gaunt, their voices trembling as they described the moments leading up to his abduction. "He was so excited about dinner," Lisa said during one emotional interview. "We never imagined we thought we were safe." Volunteers organized search parties, combing nearby woods and abandoned buildings in hopes of finding clues. Psychics offered unsolicited advice, claiming visions of Ethan alive but scared. Each day brought fresh waves of hope and despair, as tips led nowhere and time ticked inexorably onward. Then, just when it seemed all hope was lost, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a retired teacher named Margaret Hayes. While sorting through old boxes in her attic, she stumbled upon a photograph taken at a community fair several years earlier. In the background, partially obscured by a crowd, stood a man who bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the suspect. Margaret recognized him instantly, not because she knew him personally, but because he had attended multiple events in town over the years, always alone, always watching. She contacted authorities immediately, providing not only the photo but also detailed recollections of his behavior. The discovery sent investigators scrambling to re-evaluate their approach. Enhanced imaging technology revealed subtle features in the photograph that matched descriptions provided by witnesses. Facial recognition software flagged potential matches in criminal databases, narrowing the list of suspects considerably. Meanwhile, Margaret's tip prompted others to come forward with similar stories, describing encounters with the same man at various locations throughout the region. One woman recalled seeing him loitering outside a daycare center, jotting notes in a small notebook. Another mentioned how he had once tried to strike up a conversation with her son during a Little League game, only to retreat when she intervened. With renewed momentum, police launched a coordinated effort to track him down. Roadblocks were set up, patrol units doubled, and drones deployed to monitor key areas. Public alerts urged citizens to report any suspicious activity, emphasizing the importance of swift action. The pressure mounted, squeezing the man into increasingly desperate maneuvers. He abandoned his usual haunts, venturing further afield in search of anonymity. But his methods betrayed him. The same meticulous planning that had kept him hidden now painted a clear picture of his intentions. Finally, after weeks of relentless pursuit, officers cornered him in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building was dark, its windows boarded up, and its interior cluttered with debris. Inside, they found him hunched over a table, surrounded by maps and blueprints. He offered no resistance, surrendering silently as if resigned to his fate. Handcuffed and led away, he maintained an eerie calm, his expression unreadable. Later, during interrogation, he spoke in clipped sentences, refusing to elaborate on his motives or acknowledge the harm he had caused. To him, it seemed, the world was merely a stage, and he its reluctant director. Ethan was found alive but traumatized, hidden in a makeshift shelter constructed deep within the warehouse. Rescuers described the scene as haunting, blankets strewn across the floor, empty food wrappers scattered around, and crude drawings pinned to the walls depicting scenes of captivity. Despite the ordeal, Ethan clung to hope, whispering repeatedly, "I knew you'd find me." His reunion with his family was bittersweet, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. In the aftermath, the town grappled with the fallout. Survivors sought counseling, struggling to rebuild lives, fractured by fear. Communities rallied together, organizing self-defense workshops and advocating for improved safety measures. The restaurant underwent renovations, its dim corners replaced with brighter lighting and additional cameras. Yet for all the progress made, the scars ran deep, reminders of a darkness that had seeped into the fabric of everyday life. And as the man awaited trial, locked away in solitary confinement, the nation watched closely, torn between demands for justice and uneasy reflections on the forces that shape monsters and the systems that fail to stop them.